Message brokers today are the backbone of probably every product that we are using on our daily basis. Everything that should move data from one direction to another use a message broker somehow.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 251, Demystifying Modern Message Brokers with Memphis.dev. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. Victor, back in November, you had a video on your DevOps Toolkit YouTube channel titled Your CI/CD Pipelines Are Wrong. From monoliths to, events.
Yes, I do believe that we are moving, or we are already in some kind of event-based architecture for stuff. Now, depending on which area of what we're doing we're talking about, we might be further or not far in that area, right? Like if you talk about microservices as how you develop your applications, you're most likely sending events somewhere, then some other services are watching for those events and you're doing something with it. And in some cases, not all, you're simply not communicating by sending HTTP requests directly, right? From one application to another. Now, in that specific video, I was trying to convey the message that we might want to do something similar with pipelines, right? But beyond that, I think that it expands to almost anything of what we do, right?
I believe you're correct. And on today's show, we have Valera on from Memphis.dev. Valera, how are you doing?
Hi guys, I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Now, we have talked about on the podcast back in episode 97, we talked about Kafka. We've talked about another project, Captain, back in episode 90. Now, Memphis, I would say, is it somewhere in the ballpark of Kafka? It's at that level, just basically it's the plumbing, it's the infrastructure for doing messaging.
It's correct, but it's not correct. At the bottom, we are a message broker, but we have a lot of things that are above it.
So in case people haven't listened back to those previous episodes and they also are still new to the whole concept of messaging or eventing, one phrase you just said there is message broker. Can you define message broker?
I think and I believe too that message brokers today are the backbone of probably every product that we are using on our daily basis. Everything that should move data from one direction to another use a message broker somehow. And if we just try to simplify it, these two words is just something that just get produced, that takes data and push it to the consumer to the right direction in the real time.
But if I'm doing things in real time, why do I need events? It seems like I would just call an endpoint and be done with it.
Because sometimes you need to, all the time you want to store this kind of events and be sure that they are stored somewhere and not get lost. And some of the times you even want to enrich this data and do some manipulation with it before it goes to the end user.
This is interesting because this is one of the points I wanted to ask somebody that does this on a daily basis. I understand the basics of I send an event, it gets queued, stored, something, doesn't matter, and then it's eventually consumed. How do I know, as the person writing that event, that I can trust that that event is not going to be lost? Because in just a REST world, I could lose a call. It could be dropped for any reason. How can I be confident that an event that I send isn't going to be dropped?
So it depends on how you create your specific application, but we allow to use some acknowledgement-based communication. So every message that goes and comes to the message broker, to Memphis accordingly, can give you back an acknowledge. And after that, you can see all the journey of this message in the dashboard itself. When the message, when the data, okay, let's call it data, come to the station or to the stream, for example, once again, depends on the user. It can be replicated. It can be stored to some tiered storage as free, for example. And in this way, we ensure that the data is all the time there.
Until it doesn't need to be.
Until it doesn't. Yeah, it depends on you too, on the user and the retention you configure for this kind of specific logic.
What do most people do when it comes to message retention?
Go default.
Go default.
Yeah, go default. And then after that, they start to think about what's going on there.
What's the point of defaults, Darren, if it does not reflect the most common use cases?
Exactly.
Well, I had to ask because, I'm thinking, all right, I send a message. I expect it as a, junior developer. I send a message. I expect it to be consumed immediately, no latency at all. And then I put on my old guy Darren hat and know that that's just not real life.
You will correct me because I might be wrong, but I think that what you said, Darren, sounds pretty wrong, right? Isn't it supposed to be, I send a message and without the latter part, and I expect it to be consumed? Isn't the idea that I send a message and I don't care who consumes it? Isn't it the point that we are decoupling stuff by me either consuming a message or creating a message, not really worrying who is going to consume it?
That's part of this concept, but you can take, for example, another thing that some kind of consumers are maybe a different application with some disaster happened there. The consumer will come back eventually sometime during the day, and no one wants to lose the data that was already produced to the message broker, and it need to be consumed.
But if we already had it, let's take your example for a moment for S3. Assuming the durability of S3 is great, and in general it is, but what happens when that S3 region where my data is stored goes offline? Then what do I do?
Okay, maybe I didn't explain it well, but the S3 tiering storage is some kind of backup on top of backup.
Agreed. And I'm saying all of those have failed. I'm saying all of it, because I have been in scenarios where S3 has failed. So then what do I do?
So first of all, you need to understand before that if this kind of... let's rephrase it. We don't expect, you as a user don't expect that this kind of data will store there for forever. And that's why the retention comes to the game initially. So we just want to make sure that in case of the retention was passed, we are moving this data to the S3, and then you can configure another backup scenarios over there as well and connect it again. We can connect, we can backup S3 buckets to different regions and create some tiering even there.
So the key part there is the tiering of the messagings. So the retention policy, it can be tiered out however many times you want. Basically, however much money you want to spend is how many tiers you can have.
Yeah, exactly. But once again, most of the time we see it in our world that those kind of messages are meant to be just, like you said before, it's like a real time. So I will not store them for weeks. I will prefer to store them for 4 hours, maybe for 2 days, and so on. And of course, you need to understand the cost in this specific area.
I want to go back to Victor's sort of opening statement. Everything is becoming events. If you think about it, that's sort of like how real life is. I guess when you go to pay for something, you use your cash or you use your card, and it appears to be transactional, but in reality, it's event-based. Because the only thing you did is you handed the thing to the card swiper, to the cashier. But from that point forward, everything's event-based because what you triggered actually was an event of sequence of things that happen before you get back your receipt. Is that true? Not true. I mean, am I thinking too linear? I'm often accused of thinking too linear.
So yeah, I'm agree with you with this statement. It's really everything and every act can start a series of events, and even when you are going to pay with your credit card and you just swipe your card there, it creates the event, and we need to do something with the event. It can go and jump between different logics until it comes to the credit card company itself. And every jump in this journey will go through the message brokers eventually.
So let's talk about Memphis just for a second. Memphis, there's a commercial part of it, but there's also open source part of it. So for me, as somebody that enjoys development, I'm not going to go to commercial right out of the gate. Just not going to, right? Because I don't need to. Well, or maybe I need to, but I don't need to. Here's sort of my head scratching moment. I've been around for quite a while. I'm primarily a Java developer, or my company is primarily a Java developer. So if I'm Java, I'm probably going to lean towards Kafka. Just because, right? Because it's been out there since dirt.
Why?
Okay, here's why for a moment. Kafka's part of Apache Foundation, blah, 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 right? So there's all of that. How does Memphis fit into that sort of the side of the ecosystem?
I will go with the why of Victor, first of all, because Kafka is, it's there been for a while, okay? And most of the developers, and I will say DevOps engineers that sometimes use Kafka, know that not everything is simple, and it's not just enough to be a part of Apache community, for example, to understand how to deploy it. And if we go back to Memphis in this aspect, we are trying to create, let's say, another buzzword, low-code environment for our users, that they will do mostly nothing to start to produce and consume data, no matter on the language they choose to work with. So it's just a point of how much effort you want to put into this specific task, and after that, it's the cost issues after that, and how you pay for the infrastructure. It's also how time you spend on every task.
Going back to what you said, Darin, when you're choosing a database, are you trying to find a database that is written in a specific language?
No, I just need a database.
Exactly. This was my comment towards, I come from Java, hence Kafka, right? You don't care. I mean, you care, but not because it's written in one language or another, right?
Yeah, I agree. And you are trying to look for a, let's say, better life. You don't want to work hard. We don't work to work hard. We just want to start and go.
I liked your phrase, though, coming back to reality for a moment. Not everything is simple. Why do we think we need to take the hard road always? Why are we wired that way? Or am I just the only one wired that way?
I think it's because we are human.
And also because we are engineers, right? And engineers like challenge rather than easy road, right? How many times did you hear Darin meeting some company, some team, and they like building things themselves, right? Isn't that more fun than spending a year building something that exists?
I agree with you, but sometimes you need to pay for that as well. So,
yeah, I'm not saying it's a good thing. Far from that. I'm just explaining how engineers work, right?
It's not invented here, so therefore it's not any good. So Memphis appeared, and I looked at it. I actually haven't spun it up yet. I took a look at the quick start, or getting started, whichever way it was phrased. And there was just a container image that I could just start, and I could start using it. That just seems silly, simple to me. Is that on purpose?
That's the point, yeah. We just measure it, and the time to take you from going to our website and go up with Memphis is like about 2 to 3 minutes. So it should be simple, yes.
Why is that such a big deal to you? What happened for the Memphis team to decide this has to be simple because we can't do this because of X? What was the X?
I think this question is more related to the co-founders of Memphis. I'm not one of them, but I did hear some stories, and each one of them had some issues with creating data pipelines, and on the DevOps side of installing, for example, Kafka big cluster in disconnected environments and so on. And everyone has its own struggle in these areas. And I think the main thing that connect us all in Memphis that we want to make developers' life simple as much as possible. I even would say the engineers' life simpler, and not only the developers.
And by engineer, you mean the operators?
Yeah, of course. That is my responsibility, and yeah.
Also, you can easily deduce the period when, or approximate year when the tool was created, depending on how it is set up and installed and things like that, right? I remember Kafka from a long time. I haven't been working with it for a long time, but back in the days, you could only assume that people had servers. So you need servers and you needed to set up Zookeeper, correct me if I'm wrong, something like that, and this and that. And then move 5 years later and it was slightly less complicated, still complicated, but slightly less because now tools had containers, right? Now we can assume that there is Kubernetes, so we don't need key value storage, right? You can use etcd and so on and so forth, right? So it's a big part, and I'm not talking about Memphis of Kafka specifically, right? But the ease of setup depends on assumptions of what you have, and what you had in the past is not necessarily what you have today.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's totally agree because it's depends on when you start, and it's really difficult to come back 5, 7, 10 years and rewrite all your basics. We have an advantage that we are the kid in the block.
If somebody's been listening up to this point and they're still thinking, look, I don't even want to spin up an extra container image nowhere just because I don't want any more kind of overhead. What do you say to that person that they're just unwilling to even bring in an event broker or a message broker into their systems?
If that person exists, okay, and we know they exist, they can just go to the Memphis SaaS solution, and without any installation, without any deployment, without having any infrastructure on their own, they can just sign up, spin the stations, and start producing consumed data just there without any additional effort.
So how do I trust you that I'm sending you messaging? This is my paranoid person thinking out loud. It's just like, I don't even trust sending it to my own systems, much less anybody else's systems.
If I understand you correct, so Memphis is compliant to the SOC 2 standard, for an example, and we passed all the technical requirements there, compliant with GDPR as well, and in the process of ISO compliance too. So,
okay, I'm going to go down a very bad route here, so forgive me if I go too far. GDPR compliant. Let's ignore Memphis for a moment. GDPR compliant. I don't know how you could be GDPR compliant if I'm sending you data that breaks the GDPR rules. I mean, you might be, right? You've set up all your boundaries, but as soon as people start using it and I send in all of the identifiers of all the people that live in a country that are under GDPR rules. That seems like that would break it. You're not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. It just seems interesting. It's just a funny thing to me.
All the data is encrypted. It's not visible, not to us, and it's visible only to the user itself. And the user itself is notified before that where all the data is stored, and the user decide the retention that the data will be stored to.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so data residency. That's a big deal. If I'm using the Memphis SaaS, I'm assuming that I pick the endpoint that I need to talk to so I know where residency is going to apply. How does that work? Or is there just an endpoint and then somewhere within my accounts I determine where residency is?
When you sign up initially to the Memphis, you can choose the region and the cloud provider you want to work on, and you will get the endpoint related to the specific region, and you will know where your data is stored.
So when I'm signing up, are you installing the Memphis infrastructure into my accounts? Or am I using fully managed by Memphis?
It's fully managed Memphis environment. We don't install nothing on your account. You just come, sign up, create a user. You got your account. We have some kind of multi-tenancy, and it's only your account. Your data is not available to any other accounts, and vice versa.
So I guess the key part there for me picking the cloud provider is, okay, I'm using GCP primarily, so I probably want to have Memphis in GCP and not in AWS, so I don't pay egress charges and all those other kinds of things.
Yes, if you, in case you want to just be the same, or you have some other regulations that requires you to use view only or something.
All right, so let me ask this question. As a vendor, how painful is it for you to maintain the different flavors of, I'm going to call it different flavors of Memphis, so that they can be installed and run easily within the different providers?
I don't have so much polite words to describe it, but
No need to use polite words.
So okay, so let me put it this way. So it sounds like you're going down the path of it's painful.
Yeah, exactly. It's painful. There are a lot of common logic between the vendors, but when you start digging into it, you understand that there is not so much logic between them. The same service can be totally different between two services, and the pricing is different as well between them also. You need to understand what is the best service in each cloud provider or vendor that you want to use in that point of time.
So you're saying each of the big cloud vendors are all different? How dare they?
I don't know. We need to figure it out.
And I'm going to say one more variation of that. Are you telling me that Kubernetes on the different cloud providers is actually different, and the way you interact with it is different?
It depends, but yes, sometimes it's different, but I took it too seriously.
All right. So building a company out like that to where you are dependent upon different cloud providers, you're having to deal with, just because somebody gives you a Postgres database, I'm assuming there's probably a database somewhere under Memphis at some point in time, optionally.
We use it, for metadata only. So it's not something that stores data, users' data.
And I'm using this example just because everybody should understand this. Just because you have Postgres endpoint at GCP does not mean you have the same Postgres endpoint within AWS, does not mean you have the same point in Azure. I cannot imagine as a vendor how painful that is, because it should just work. I think those are probably the exact words somebody has said within your company. It should just work.
Yeah, it happens a lot, this kind of words.
Why did you decide to, other than the obvious reasons of, I'm assuming this is the reason, you have clients that want it in this cloud provider. Is it even beyond that of why you went multi-cloud, or why you provide Memphis as a multi-cloud option?
First of all, yes, the clients are a first priority here, and if they ask, we need to go with it and be on the same cloud provider, for example. It depends on the customers, of course. Some of them are just used to use GCP, and we can talk to them and understand their actual needs. But as a company, and if we are looking to the future, we want to have this expertise of running Memphis everywhere, no matter what. And as additional layer to that, is fails happen, and they happen even to the biggest of us and the biggest cloud providers. So we need to be sure that we can run all the time, no matter what.
Even if the cloud provider goes down? Let's answer this question. We're theorizing now. I have not seen this happen before, at least not at a global scale. What happens if you have a client on GCP, they're using the GCP flavor of Memphis, and all of GCP goes down?
All regions?
Everything.
Apocalypse. Yeah.
Apocalypse is here. Okay, so that's fine.
I can answer that one. That's extinction event. I mean, right? There's the whole planet being in fire by being hit by 75 different meteoroids, right?
But you know the CEO is going to come tapping on your door saying, why isn't this working right now? We need to capitalize on this.
Okay, so let's take it theoretically. We don't expect the meteorites come here, but we have a lot of disaster recovery plans and checked things and everything, but let's take it simple as it possible. The same user that right now is producing and consuming data from GCP, and okay, we have a total disaster, all GCP is down, all data is down, we can move him to another region, to another cloud provider, to another instance of Memphis, import, export all his metadata, and he will start to produce new data exactly in the just matter of time to switch the DNS to the new cloud. Because most of the time, the data is, as I said before, it's not something that you're planning to store for decades. It's something that should need to be real-time data and events. And sometimes event, even 5 minutes after it was consumed, is not relevant anymore. So we want to go to that direction. Just switch your cloud provider and resume streaming.
So you've done all the heavy lifting to make sure that I can do that.
We are, yeah.
More or less. More or less. Okay, fair enough. I want to go back to when you were talking about multi-tenant, but nobody else can see my data. That seems good in theory, but how often have we seen in reality to where that just doesn't pan out? A misconfigure happens, not on purpose. You've done your best, but something happened. Are the messages just ignored? Even if I could see another message, yes, it's encrypted. But what's the chances of getting, I'll call it a message ID collision, to where I can actually get a handle to somebody else's message they dropped?
Okay, we are talking here about the theory, but this kind of scenario cannot happen in Memphis, okay? The account that created lives in its own bubble, and every message that's sent into this account is marked by this account, so it cannot go to a different one. And of course, the account IDs are something that cannot be repeated.
So they are written with as much uniqueness as possible.
Yeah, it's a lot of layers between them.
It's just not just the message dropped out there and I can start script kidding IDs and pull something in. And even if I could pull it in, I'm assuming every one of the messages has, so as an account, my encryption is my encryption.
Yeah.
And your account is your encryption.
Exactly.
Okay. That seems like a reasonable way of handling messaging. If we haven't convinced the listeners yet that you really should be doing messaging, and Victor, you may need to weigh in on this as well. How could we tell people, look, you're already doing messaging already, you just don't realize it, and you need to make it actually better? Am I off on that?
For me, that convincing part is easy because I'm mostly focused. I'm not that focused directly on messaging, but I'm mostly focused on Kubernetes. And Kubernetes is a event-based system, right? Which most people are not aware of it, right? But it's all events. It's all different controllers listening to events and different other controllers sending events, including humans and external entities and so on and so forth, right? And there are many, many other examples of people who don't want to use messaging of some form or event, some form of another, and yet are using it without knowing. If you create a EC2 instance in AWS, you're sending events, right? And then behind the scenes, similar things are happening as well.
I agree with you. I really don't know if there is any company that or any product that is big enough that don't use a message broker in this way or another. And then it just depends of how much advantages do you want to get from your message broker and how much effort do you want to put there.
I think that's similar to the problems that might not necessarily have to be related with events messaging, when we were trying in the past to explain the advantages of asynchronous something compared to synchronous. I believe that for humans, for us, it's easier to see things very, synchronous and sequential, right? You do this, you send it there, transactional, you get a response directly, and then you do something else. It's kind of a flow, right? A path. And when we talk about events, about messages, about asynchronous things, and so on and so forth, it's somehow harder to have a feeling that you're in control. I'm not even saying to be in control, but have a feeling that, hey, I don't know what's happening, right? I just sent a message. You even, Dani, said it earlier in this conversation, something along the line, and I'm paraphrasing. So when I send a message, how do I ensure that something consumes it, right? As if our brains are wired in a very coupled way of thinking, in a way.
It's some kind of broadcast messages. Yeah. It goes anywhere, and you just need to capture.
Well, I think what I'm trying to, we'll use the word human again in this world of AI. I'm trying to come to a conclusion. I send a request, I expect a response. Some people do, some people don't. I'm one of those wired, like, I'm talking to you, so I expect a response from you. Until that very final conversation, where it's like, thanks, bye. It's like, oh, okay, nobody has to say bye back to me.
No, that's not true, Darren. That's true when you call somebody.
Yeah, I just wanted. You need to use phone in this case.
Exactly. When you send an email, you probably forget about it until you receive a response, if you do receive it.
Okay, so email is one of the greatest async things of all time. There are pluses and minuses of email compared to Slack. Slack is event-based, but people now expect Slack to be answered immediately.
Just ignore them.
Okay, why do I go down this route? I don't know. It's just one of those things. Memphis.dev, that's at Memphis.dev. MEMPHIS. Thank you for spelling it correctly and not spelling it weird, like a weird Web 3.0 thing, .dev. So I can sign up for an account on Memphis.dev, correct?
Yes, you're correct.
More
He
or less.
doubted. He had a strange pause over there. He doubted whether you can sign up. I think that he doubted your abilities to sign up, Darren.
Okay. Well, okay. So I know I can sign up, but let me.
Of course
so
you can.
I'm actually,
Yes. No pause between.
All right. So here's the reason why I'm saying, because there is a basic version that's $0 per month. You get 2 gigs a month, 1 cluster, a max of 1 retention day per station. What's a station?
Station is kind of paradigm to topic in Kafka, for example, but it's station because it has additional tools there. It's not just a point in the data pipeline.
So station, you're using a train metaphor?
Never thought about it, but maybe.
Okay. 1 tenant per cluster, 1 processing station, connectors, and 2 management users. How much can I actually do with 2 gig per month? I guess it depends on the size of my messages.
It depends on the size of your messages, of course, and it depends on the how much messages you produce and how much you push to Memphis, of course.
So I'm guessing if I'm sending a payload of, I'm assuming the limit is payload size and not all the extra metadata that you're carrying.
Yeah.
I get the metadata for free.
Yeah.
Okay. Just making sure. Right? Yeah. 'Cause I've seen people do silly things before. Let's say I've got I can't do the math really fast in my head. Let's say I've got not even that big. Let's say it's a 50K message.
Okay.
Right? So that means I get roughly 20 messages to a meg. And then, so let's say if I'm sending 1,000 messages a month, let's say I'm just sending 3 messages a day, 30 messages a day. I can't even do math live. That's still 900. It seems like I'd be well under that if they're really small payloads.
Yeah.
Right? So I could use Memphis for a lot of different things. What can I not use Memphis for? What would, let's move out of the free and just think of all of them for a moment. Where does Memphis not fit? Where is Memphis not the fit for what I'm trying to do?
I think we already talked about it earlier today. We are not database. We will not store your data for decades. So it just needs to be consumed in a proper way. It's event streaming platform. And now you can fit almost every use case and every scenario under this umbrella.
So full messaging, think of normal retention, but my question here is, what happens if that message times out? Do I get a notification that it was never consumed? Does it go to a dead letter queue? What happens?
It depends on the logic you configure there, but yes, we have out of the box dead letter queue, okay? And it can be configured in different ways. And one of the ways you can, even let's say the retention was okay and everything was fine, but you can even create some kind of schema enforcement with Memphis. And in case your produced data is not aligned with the schema you configured before, it will go to the dead letter queue also. And then you can decide what you do with these messages. If you want to resend them, if you want to move them, if you want to delete them, and so on. And you can even consume them again with different consumers with different logic. So this is one of the features that come out of the box in the open source and in the cloud as well. So,
and I can self-host if I wanted to, but why would I want to self-host if I'm not going to be spending a lot or generating a lot of messages? Just use the cloud.
Sometimes users, let's go back. We are engineers. We want to go hard, to work hard.
Yeah, but sometimes I don't.
So
and this might be one of those things.
So this Memphis Cloud is exactly for you.
Stepping back and looking at this now as we've gone through this conversation, as an AWS user, this would have been SQS and SNS-ish, ballpark, right? Just not perfect, but that's what I'm thinking. On GCP, it would have been their variation of those. On Azure, it would have been those variation of those. Where I see the power in this is if I go to Memphis and I know as a company we end up changing cloud providers every 2 to 3 years, this would make me happy because I sure as heck would not want to reimplement an SQS on GCP or reimplement whatever. Having that layer on top that's cloud provider agnostic is a big deal to me.
That's part of the missions we are trying, part of the goals we are trying to hit on. So yeah.
So again, it's Memphis.dev. Valera, thanks for being on with us today.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.